Why don't people cross themselves? Why don't they kneel down to pray? Why is your pulpit stuck under the gallery like that? Maybe you've asked similar questions yourself, or been asked those sorts of questions by others. Is it because we don't take our religion very seriously? Is that the reason? We don't care as much as other Christians and other churches about doing the right thing for God. Well, it might surprise you to discover that Jesus himself was asked similar questions. We're in a little run of stories in Matthew chapter 9 where people question Jesus' religious standards. Matthew has been setting out the evidence that Jesus is the Messiah, the promised one of God, the Holy One, who is going to come to save God's people. And yet some of Jesus' actions didn't fit with people's expectations of a holy man from God. And so in chapter 9, verse 3, which we looked at a couple of weeks ago, when Jesus forgave the sins of a paralyzed man, the teachers of the law muttered amongst themselves, "This man is blaspheming." Last week, we saw the Pharisees speaking to Jesus' disciples in verse 11. "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And now in today's passage, some of the followers of John the Baptist pluck up the courage to speak to Jesus directly. Now, John is one of the good guys in the Bible. He's the forerunner, preparing the way for the Messiah. And yet even his followers still seem conditioned by the old religion, the old way of doing things, what we described last week as a circles of holiness approach to God. Are your religious standards slipping? John's disciples ask. We can see why they're asking. Why don't you observe Lent like all the really religious people do? You would expect the Messiah and his closest followers to be more scrupulous than anyone else in keeping religious routines. And yet they come and ask him in verse 14, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" Well, Jesus' answer is breathtaking in its boldness. He is very self-centered. He says, "It's because of who I am," he says. "I am the man who changes everything." That's his response. "I am the man who changes everything." Wow. Can you imagine? Imagine a group of bishops plucking up the courage to go and see the Archbishop of Canterbury and saying to him, "Sir, we need to ask you, we've noticed that in your cathedral you've changed everything about how you do things. The priests don't wear robes, they've moved all their services to Wednesdays," and so on and so on. And the Archbishop Justin says, "Yes, that's right. It's because of who I am. I'm the man who changes everything." Can you imagine him saying that? Can you imagine that kind of scenario? It would be a sign that the Archbishop had lost it, wouldn't it? You'd send for the men in white coats. Or maybe he'd be on some sort of crazed power trip. And yet that's exactly the sort of thing that Jesus is saying about himself here. He is the man who changes everything. He certainly has a Messiah complex. And we need to work out whether Jesus was right to have a Messiah complex, or whether he was a gigantic fraud or a complete madman. So let's look down again at Matthew chapter 9 and verses 14 and 15. John's disciples came and asked him, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. Then they will fast." The principle here is one of relationship, not ritual. Relationship, not ritual. He draws a parallel with a wedding. His disciples are like the groomsmen, the bunch of men who are there to support the bridegroom on his wedding day. And his point is very simple. You don't go on a diet at a wedding. It's a very simple point. You don't go on a diet at a wedding. It's like Christmas. We've just had Christmas, haven't we? Now, is there anyone here that went on a diet on Christmas Day? Anyone? I didn't think so. Maybe afterwards. But you don't go on a diet at Christmas. You don't go on a diet at a wedding, do you? A wedding is meant to be about celebration. Everything else can wait. Our wedding day was a car crash. Sorry, let me rephrase that. On our wedding day, there was a car crash. Thankfully, there was no one badly hurt, but some of the guests had a little collision in the high street outside the church. Here's the thing, though. No one told me or Jenny until afterwards. You see, a wedding day isn't a day for anything except celebration, is it? They told us about it afterwards. A wedding day isn't a day to be dealing with bad news. Jesus says you don't fast, which is a sign of mourning, while the bridegroom is with you. Do you see why that is an astonishingly self-centered thing for Jesus to say? Jesus is saying he is the bridegroom. He says you should be celebrating because I'm here. He says, my disciples, they aren't fasting because I'm here. The usual standards of religious behavior don't apply. I'm here now, the man who changes everything. Marriage is a picture throughout the Bible of God's relationship with his people. It comes up in some of the very earliest chapters of the Bible. It comes up in some of the very latest chapters, the last chapters of the Bible. It comes all the way through. I'd just like us to look at one of the passages in the Old Testament that talks about God and his people, like a marriage. So keep your finger in Matthew chapter 9 and turn, please, to page 902, Hosea chapter 2. Last week we heard Jesus quote from the book of Hosea. He said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And I don't think it's a coincidence that straight afterwards we get this image of God's relationship with his people as a marriage, which is one of the main images in the book of Hosea. So page 902. And let's pick it up from verse 14 there, halfway down the left-hand side. God is speaking about his dealings with his people Israel after the punishment of the exile. And he says, God says, verse 14, therefore I am now going to allure her, that is Israel. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals, that is the false gods, from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds in the sky and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land so that they may all lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. It's a relationship, isn't it, between God and his people. It's about love and commitment, faithful devotion. And going back to Matthew chapter 9, that is the kind of imagery that Jesus is tapping into. How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? Jesus is saying, I am God, the husband of my people. I have come to be betrothed, to be pledged in marriage to those who will accept me, to lead them into a new rescue, a new relationship of faithful devotion, a place where there will be no more war or violence, but safety and justice forever. I will be your protector. And in the context of the question about fasting, he says, so it's now about relationship with me. not about religious rituals. Just take a minute for that to sink in. It means that everything is all about Jesus. Questions about religious rituals, what we wear in church, whether we stand or sit or kneel to pray, all of those sorts of things are now firmly shoved into second place. It doesn't mean they don't matter at all. Jesus isn't saying that fasting is wrong, for example. In fact, some of these verses are some of the strongest indications in the whole Bible that it's good for us to fast now that Jesus has been taken from us. But all of these things are now secondary matters. They're all revolving around and controlled by our relationship with Jesus himself. Just as when you get married, your life should utterly change to fit in with the life of your spouse. So if we're Christians, our lives now revolve around our relationship with Jesus. I'm not going to spell out today the specifics of what that should look like. Our verses don't spell it out. We can help one another with that maybe afterwards. But it does mean we need to get one thing completely clear. Christianity is about a relationship with Jesus rather than ritual. He is the man who changes everything. And so I need to ask you, where do you stand with Jesus? When I meet people in church for the first time, every week it seems there are people visiting us, newcomers and so on, I'm not particularly interested in whether you observe Lent or whether you say your prayers in the morning or the evening or whether you prefer traditional hymns or modern choruses. What I want to know is this: do you know Jesus? Is your life orientated around him? It may be that you're just at the getting to know you stage with Jesus. Maybe you've just recently started coming to church and this is all very new for you. Well, if you take one thing away this morning, make it this: Christianity isn't about ritual, it's about a relationship. Get to know Jesus as best you can. Keep coming back and hearing about him from Matthew's Gospel and from other parts of the Bible. Take a Gospel away and read it on your own. Ask me and other Christians that you know what Jesus is like, what kind of husband he'd make. Join that Christianity Explored course that's mentioned on the notice sheet. And I hope you'll see that Jesus is a husband worthy of your confidence and your devotion. For those of us who have maybe been Christians for many years, is it still all about Jesus for you? We might start the Christian life with a really clear passion for Jesus, but then clutter starts crowding in, church commitments, Christian duties, all the good things to do, and before we know it, our ritual has crowded out our relationship. Maybe we need to refocus on Jesus, rekindle our relationship with him. Now, all of this has implications, not just for our personal devotional life, but also for our religious structures and patterns together. And Jesus goes on to give two illustrations of the incompatibility of the new way with him and the old way of religion. Out with the old, in with the new. Let's read verses 16 and 17 again. Two illustrations, the same basic message. Verse 16, no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. Both verses there illustrate the incompatibility of the old and the new. First, you can't patch up the old with the new. Cloth shrinks as you wash it. And therefore, if you stitch a new piece of cloth onto an old pair of jeans, as the new cloth shrinks, it will make a much worse tear than you started with. Second, you can't contain the new in the old. When I was a kid, my dad used to make his own wine, and he used to put little plastic valves in the top of the bottles as they were fermenting to release the excess pressure. And sometimes he'd replace the valve with a cork too early, and the cork would burst open and the inside of the airing cupboard would be sprayed with new nettle wine or whatever it was. Well, in Jesus' time, rather than glass bottles, they would keep wine in animal skins, leather flasks. And whereas new skins were flexible enough to stretch as the wine carried on fermenting, old leather gets dry and brittle. And so you'd never put new wine that's still fermenting into old wineskins. It would burst and ruin the wine and the wineskins. Two illustrations then about the incompatibility of the old with the new. If Jesus had been speaking today, I guess he would have talked about old technology and new technology. He'd probably have used an illustration about the person who used Tipex on the screen of their new word processor when they made a mistake. Or the person who was given one of the first brand new iPads and thought it was a funky new chopping board. The point is this: it's no use trying to operate the old ways of religion now that Jesus has come. We talked last week about the idea of circles of holiness around God. The idea that some of us start a long way off, far from God, and we approach him through religious rituals, through making ourselves acceptable to him, through our fasting or our prayers or our church attendance or our giving to charity. That's the principle that lies behind Old Testament Judaism. The special people of God, doing the right things, coming to him in his temple, bringing the right sacrifices at the right time of the year in the hope of making themselves acceptable to God. All of that is blown apart. It's blown apart when Jesus comes. He's come to forgive sins. He's come for sinners, outsiders. He's come to be the bridegroom, the husband of his people. It's about relationship with him, not ritual. And so that means that we don't try to patch up the old religion. No, we throw it away and start again with Jesus. It means we don't try to contain the new religion in the structures of the old. As I said last week, lots of people talk about the three great Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We're all people of the book. And so we look for the forms of our religions to fit on the same grids. We call our buildings temples, churches, or mosques, but they're all seen as holy places to meet with God. We have our leaders, our priests, or our imams. We have our set times and patterns for prayer and so on. Some people want to fit Christianity neatly onto that same grid with those other religions. Yes, we make more of Jesus than the others, but well, even Muslims say that Jesus was a prophet. Not as important as Muhammad may be, but still a prophet. And more than half our Bibles is made up of the Jewish scriptures. Aren't our religions similar enough? Isn't there enough division in the world already without driving a wedge between the three great Abrahamic religions? What would Jesus say about that? What would Jesus say? He would say, I am the man who changes everything. You can't patch up the old with the new. You can't contain the new with the old. Christianity isn't just another circles of holiness religion with Jesus added in for garnish. It's not like one of those pizzas you can order where they ask you, do you want an egg on top? Jesus isn't the egg on top of our old religion. He's the bridegroom around whom our whole system revolves. If you remove Jesus from Christianity, it's like removing the sun from the solar system. Everything else just collapses. So what do you expect of church? Do you have a particular idea of what a church building should look like? How a church minister should dress? What kind of songs we should sing? What kind of rituals we should perform? Do you judge whether we take our religion seriously on the basis of how we're doing on those things? Last year, some people came to St. Anne's for the first time, and they said to someone here, they didn't say it to me, they said it to someone else, "Poor you, your church is so bare. Where are all the statues? Where are your icons? Where are your images?" And one of our quieter church members said, "Well, actually, we don't need those things. We've got Jesus and the Bible." Isn't that brilliant? He is all we need. Jesus is the man who changes everything. Our personal devotional lives, our worship as a church together needs to revolve around him. There's something in the human heart that will keep on drifting back to a kind of circles of holiness view of religion. We start with good practices because they seem to point to Jesus, but before we know it, those things have become rituals for their own sake. They've become like the hard leather of an old wineskin, and they will be burst apart by the explosive power of Jesus. That's what happened at the Reformation. It's 500 years this year exactly since Martin Luther ignited the Reformation by calling the church back from its rituals into relationship with Jesus. But we easily drift back there without realizing it. Maybe we can help one another afterwards, spot ways in which we're in danger of hardening back into that kind of old circles of holiness view of religion. Let me leave you with this question. When people get to know you at work, in your street, wherever it is, as people get to know you, as people get to know our church family at St. Anne's, what do they say about us? Do they say, "Oh, that person, that group of people, they're very religious, committed churchgoers, very devout"? Or do they say, "Those people are all about Jesus"? It's as if they're married to him. Let's take a moment to reflect, and then I'll lead us in a prayer.